All right, welcome to Live, Lead, and In Between, a podcast for leaders who want to be better at leading in life and everywhere in between. My name is Travis Jones, and I'm the host for this podcast, and it is 2025 now, and I know I'm a little late in getting out a new podcast for the year. I did put out one called Equipping for What's Next, and it is kind of a New Year's shot at the New Year's to encourage people, and it was also a message that I preached at the church that I serve at. But for this episode, this is actually episode 61, and I was sitting at my desk here, and I was thinking about what I wanted to talk through, and say, and it was probably the first time that I actually had a blank in my brain, because typically I have a lot of content just kind of swirling around in there, and it's sometimes difficult for me to connect those two things together, and I had to put a little bit of effort into it. But this one I had a blank, and I sat here and I thought, why do I have a blank with what to talk about? Does that mean I have no content or anything like that? And the more I thought about it, the less that became the thing, and it actually kind of spurred on some thought with me about, why that I felt like I had this blank about what to actually talk about, what I wanted to say. Because usually I have no shortage of words. And as I was thinking about that, it occurred to me that, for me, this new year, and probably for many of you, in the message I preached, I talked about how we look forward to a new thing, right? We look forward to a new thing and hope that things would be better. Not that things are bad where you're at, but hope that things would be better where you're going. But the problem typically is that we are not different where we're at. So then when we get to where we're going, it's the same. And we're not ready to face the things that are in front of us. So I think the focus of this podcast and some of my thinking for this new year has been about being different where you're at, being different in the place you are planted, and what that means across the board. Not so much about goals, not so much about I want to be here by a certain time. And again, I have no problem with that. I last year set a couple of goals, and I'll talk about that in a second. I didn't meet them, but I have no problem with goals, but it's more about being present and different where you're at. And I want to explain a little bit about that. So for me going into 2025, and maybe this will speak to a lot of others out there, but going into 2025, the thought has been banging around inside my brain about literally being different where I'm at, not being as easily frustratable with things, because frustration is your enemy, not really looking at things the same way. You're trying to have a different perspective on things. And honestly, that takes a whole heck of a lot of effort to do. And so for the new year, one of my things is, again, just being different, different than I was in the old year, because I want to be ready for what's next. But what I've come to realize is that being different is a result of all the things that I went through prior. And so, with that said, for the new year, there's the couple things that I think are pretty integral. And I'm just going to kind of ramble these off, one at a time. And I'm not sure how many there'll be, but I think the first one would be being less frustratable. Frustration is your enemy. I had a podcast about that a while back. One of the things that drives me crazy is my schedule. I'll sit in my small group and I'll talk about how I get so frustrated with my schedule. My wife will hear me talk about and complain about how I get so frustrated with my schedule. And then I'll speak and say my schedule takes the brunt of all the stuff that happens in our lives, right? I have the flexibility in my schedule, and we utilize the flexibility in my schedule. And in my schedule, I wind up not having an easy time of setting work boundaries. Like I'm always feel like I'm on. And so that's one of the things that's been really frustrating me probably since COVID. Like when COVID hit, it wrecked my schedule, and I don't feel like I ever really recovered. And I think one of the things that God has been trying to teach me is that, I need to be okay and different where I'm at. And the things that need to get done and I want to get done, they'll get done, and they'll get done in the right way as long as I have the right attitude about it. So being unfrustratable is probably the number one thing that I think for the new year that I would go after. And that's one of the things I'm working on, being unfrustratable. Now, what that does is that the work that goes into that means I have to create a system around myself that allows for flexibility. And, I'll be honest with you, a lot of the tools that are out there, like iCalendar and Outlook and all the things that are present for helping you be productive, they don't lend themselves to helping you being flexible. So I'm having to rethink and retool a little bit of that. So I think the number one thing would be being unfrustratable. I think the number two thing would be being intentional, unfrustratable and being intentional. I think that being intentional in the new year will help you. And I think it'll help me in the sense that when I'm intentional about what I'm doing, I'm present for it. And so I think you could actually say being intentional and being present are kind of one and the same for me anyway. They feel like two sides of the same coin. If I'm intentional, I'm present, right? If my kids are with me and they're talking and I'm watching something on YouTube, like I was watching the other day, and my daughter came up and started talking to me, and I was really into what I was watching on YouTube because it was part of kind of where I'm headed in the ministry area that I'm dealing with, and it was kind of an educational thing. I actually thought for a moment and stopped what I was doing and spent the time to hear what my daughter had to say. Now, what my daughter had to say had nothing to do with what was going on YouTube, but she wanted to tell me about something that was important to her. And so I wanted to be intentional and listen to that, and at the same time be present for her because it was important to her. And I did in that moment, and guess what happened? Right after that, the material and content that I was watching was still there. Though I had to watch a commercial, it was still present. So being unfrustratable, being intentional and present. And then I think for the third one, and I think there's really only three, because I feel like this year is more of a simplistic, for me, is a simplistic approach to things and systems and New Year's type business. But out of those, two and a half things, the third one would be being consistent, staying consistent. And again, when you hear that, if you're like me, and you use your calendar to dictate what goes on in your life, and it's good, the calendars aren't good for flexibility. And when you want to be consistent, flexibility is your enemy because you can't be flexible and consistent mostly at the same time. So I don't have an answer for that yet, and I'm trying to figure out how I can be consistent yet flexible in my calendar and still get the results that I'm looking for with some of the things that I'm looking for. Like one of the things that I am looking for is really, I've purchased the gear that I need and I've started running. I've been getting up early before dawn and going running and things like that. And that's probably that's the hardest thing to stay consistent about. And mostly that's in my brain, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's my schedule that dictates that with having multiple kids and doing different things and, my wife's schedule and things like that. So staying consistent in everything that I do and who I am and how I handle things, that is the third thing for this year. So it was being unfrustratable. It was being present, really, and the other side of that coin with present was there, and then also being consistent. Okay, so those are the three things that I'm kind of looking for the new year that I think are actually smart ways to go about some stuff as you enter into the new year. I think it's less about goals and more about those things, and have the goal. The goals are there. Have them in the back of your mind. Have them on your whiteboard. Like I've got some stuff written back here. Have them on your whiteboard as visual reminders. But remember, the goal is pretty much the result of the other things. So if your goal is to go running, if your goal is to get up and, make sure that you brush your teeth within 5 minutes, you got to be consistent. You got to be present, and you got to be unfrustratable. And all those things. So with that said, I think I'll keep this one short today because I'm still working through some of that content. But as always, I'd love to hear things that you have to say, things that you're working on for the new year. I think it would be an awesome series of podcasts to do through January, even though I think we're through the middle of January when this will air. But I still think it's good. But I'd love to hear those things. And as always, if you have additional comments or you have topics you'd like to hear about or talk about, let me know. You can email me at liveleadandinbetween@gmail.com, and I will be sure to reply to you, and we'll get that topic up there, and we'll kind of discuss it a little bit. So with that said, this has been Live, Lead, and In Between. Lead well.